So, again, good evening, everyone who is in Europe. Good morning, everyone who is on this side of the planet in the United States. Today we have a first out of three symposium. It's about the achievements and the failure of Holocaust education. And the plan is to have, again, three symposia. One, it's outlook from this organization, and Steve Bronner, one of the co-directors of the organization, will tell more about that, about the organization and general views. And the second one is going to be about US outlook on this problem. And then third one in May is going to be worldview, okay, world outlook. So, and today we have three speakers. We have Stephen Bronner, Professor Stephen Bronner. We have Dr. Antonietta Elia from Italy, but Antonietta sometimes in Italy, sometimes in Spain, and Europe is small, so she jumps from place to place. And myself, but we give three different angles on the same problem. And I would like to start with Stephen Bronner, and he will tell us, his views, how this problem is connected to the work of the organization and to our developments.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I appreciate it, Igor, and welcome to all of you. This conference is, as Igor said, being sponsored by the International Council for Diplomacy and Dialogue, of which I and Eric Goslin are co-directors. When we formed this organization about 2 years ago, we decided that it would have two basic functions. One would be to basically mediate conflicts, engage ourselves with associations in civil society that are that have tensions with one another. And we've started to do that in various ways, in Lebanon, in Yemen, and elsewhere. But the other part of our activities, or the council's activities, has been to educate. And if we are practically involved in attempts to mediate violence or mitigate violence, one of the ways that this is done is by learning about violence and genocide. And to this extent, we've done a number of different panels and a number of different symposia. You can check that out at our website, www.icdd.com. I should say we've also been engaged with various government officials. We will enter the UN's and UNESCO's as official representatives. And as I say, especially during the COVID crisis, we feel that it's of particular importance. We have the opportunity to try and further education and political education, public education. And there's certainly no better place to begin than with the Holocaust in the United States. Now, what I think is very interesting is that it seems to me that two things are occurring at the same time. One is an overabundance of information about the Holocaust, to the point where one is talking about genocide fatigue. In other words, people are simply becoming bored and indifferent to genocide because it's happening all over the world. The other situation, though, is with this seeming overabundance, this flood of information has grown a kind of ignorance, which is shocking. I'll read you a few statistics. You can think about it. I have a little more to say on it. 63% of Americans between 18 and 39 don't know that 6 million Jews, were murdered in the Holocaust. 50% can't name a single concentration camp. 20% aren't sure that the Holocaust happened at all, to which the official establishment of among Jewish lobbies emphasized the need to attack Holocaust deniers. I don't think that's the primary issue. What I see as the primary issue is something different. It's up to us to begin to educate people about the uniqueness on the one hand and the similarity on the other hand of the Holocaust to other genocides. I can tell you that I've taught a course on Nazism a dozen times in my 40 years at Rutgers University. Forgetting now these most basic questions, I don't think that the statistics I read you show very much. To me, the basic these kind of issues wane in comparison to issues like the following. Can you give a sense of how a concentration camp is organized? Nothing. Can you name a one person outside the Nazi party who helped facilitate Hitler's rise to power? Nothing. Can you give one instance of where you think the Nazi rise to power could be halted? Nothing. This was how we began our classes. And when I asked, well, what have you read in high school about the Holocaust? There was only, in fact, I was just talking to Dan Jacobs, one of our people on our executive committee, who's, I don't know, 15, 20 years younger than 25 years younger than I am. I said, what did you read in high school about the Holocaust? And he said, Anne Frank, which is what everybody reads in the United States. Now, this is a very remarkable young woman, a kid, a teenager. But what's very interesting is that her diary, her famous diary, is not about the Holocaust at all. It's about a young girl sitting in, basically sitting in an attic in terror. When you ask, what is the Holocaust? What do you get? You get a virtual experience of what supposedly occurred, because you know in advance that that young girl is going to die in Auschwitz. What happens is that emotion overcomes any kind of reason, and people are emotioned out. They hear about the emotional genocides in the Congo, which, by the way, also 6 million people were killed. They hear about so many different genocides, they don't know what to make about it. And here we have a perfect example with Anne Frank. Yes, she could be any young girl, but that's precisely the problem. She can be any young girl caught in a terrible set of totalitarian circumstances. What makes this situation unique? Or like we say on Passover, what makes this night different from all other nights? Unless we can answer that, we're not going to go very far. And it simply won't do to bring up things, well, 6 million Jews were killed. 20 million people were killed under Stalin. 6 million were killed in the Congo. How they were killed, Omar Bartok talks about the industrialization of killing. Now, that's very nice from an academic standpoint, but I'm quite sure that those 2 million people in Cambodia who were basically starved and clubbed to death are not quite concerned about these kind of niceties. People can die. And by the way, in Cambodia, a larger percentage of the population was killed than the Jews in Europe. In short, what I'm suggesting to you is that Holocaust education in the United States has been an abysmal failure. The achievements are minor. People from my generation, we remember the Eichmann trial, but that's gone. We have to begin anew. And I think that the usual answer to this, we've got to make it simple, is exactly the wrong answer. We have to begin to teach the Holocaust as a complex event with a complex set of literature behind it. I've never understood why it is that we sit there and we have these kids read Anne Frank or even Elie Wiesel, rather than Egon Kogan, another person who was in Auschwitz for a number of years, who wrote a brilliant analysis of how Auschwitz functioned. Why don't we have them read Kogan? Well, because it's not as emotionally appealing. But that's the problem, not the answer, not the solution. It's time we begin with people learning something about the Holocaust, which means how did it come about? How could it have been prevented? And how did it function? These are the questions that I see as important. And with regard to literature, let me close with one more thing. If we're going to think about some criterion for literary works or memoirs, I think we have to do two things at the same time. One is we need a book which has an emotional pull, which shows how the Holocaust and what the characters experienced has a humanistic trajectory. In other words, it applies to all people. But on the other hand, we have to show that it applies specifically in this case. It has to show the individual and it has to show the mass, what's happening to the two. And there are not many books that do that. One, if you want an example, is my favorite book on the Holocaust, which of course is out of print. It's by André Schwarzbart, a French Jew who lost 40 people in the Holocaust. Schwarzbart's The Last of the Just is a forgotten masterpiece. And we have allowed that to be forgotten. We have allowed Kogan's work to be forgotten. There must, and the reason is particularly in the United States, I think a very simple reason. We go for the lowest common denominator, and that's a mistake. The argument that people will read, Anne Frank or Wiesel is just the first step. People will then read more later. It just isn't true. We would like it to be true, but it's not. And so I think we have to begin in a very different way. And I hope that our International Council for Diplomacy and Dialogue will help steer things in a new direction. Thank you. Igor?
Okay, thank you, Steve. Thank you very much. And next is Dr. Antonietta Elia, please. Antonietta.
Thank you, Can you hear me well? Thank you very much, Igor, to convene such symposium series. Thank you, Stephen, for your intervention. I must confess that I feel a little bit sad. Try to understand me. If we need to underline such kind of terrible event and try to re-educate people about what happened in 2021, it a little bit sad, at least. But that's our mission today, today and every day, to try to do the best, to not forget, and to take concrete measure, not only from an educational point of view, but from a cultural point of view. I would like to use a more ample term, because it's a matter of not only of education, but of perception of what happened, about what happened. I would like to use the reference to humanistic approach that already used Stephen. A humanistic approach, in my view, in my personal view, imply that we should insist about the perception of what it was. I know that it's quite impossible because we had the chance to not live such a tragedy directly, but it's a tragedy of humanity. So that's why we should insist about perception. So today I will try to not be so much to not do so much reference to law matters, legal issues about the definition of negationism under criminal law systems, but starting from perception, I would like to call upon attention about the data about anti-Semitism collected by the European Commission monitoring system in Europe in the framework in the timeline between 2009 and 2019. What is emerging in that report is that there is a lack of data from a lot of states in European Union, including the former member UK. Why? Because there is a problem inside the state to define an act, a declaration, as an anti-Semitic, as against Jewish community or based on religious identity. There is a very big problem. So in many cases, you can't find so much data about that. And that's important. This point is really important. I will say later why. Specifically in few European countries, more than in others, and especially in Italy. And the other aspect about perceptions is the other side of perception. The same report includes the perception of young Jewish living in European countries about the increasing of anti-Semitism. They had in more than 80% of cases, they perceived a very high level of increasing of anti-Semitism, and that's a very big problem. And that's the consequence of lack of education and lack of a very strong cultural message in the society at national level. Firstly, why I underline the fact that many states has a lot of difficulty to define hate speech and hate crimes against the Jewish community, anti-Semitism act, and all related actions and based on hatred. Because I would like to draw the attention of our colleagues and friends about what is happening now in my home countries. Igor already mentioned that I'm between Italy and Spain, but actually I'm Italian, but I'm working in Spain. So Italy is in a very particular situation from my point of view. Because we had the chance to have survivors of Holocaust as a representative of nation, as member of the Congress, and particularly Madam Senator Liliana Segre, who I, unfortunately, I don't know personally, but I feel responsible, if you want, to diffuse her message. She is a very gentle lady of 90 years. So, and nowadays, she's one of the 12 survivors of the deportation from Milan, the unique one from her family. And in 2021, now I think from 2 years, she's living under police protection because of actions of a threat before her house and so on. So that's why I'm insisting in the fact that the consequence of lack of clarity, lack of strong position from authority in the case before then education. Education is at the same time needed when there is the structure of the state, the responsible authority recognizing that there is a problem and take effective measure. This is just the possibly one of the worst example we are currently living today. But I feel also optimistic, and I would like to use an expression that the same Madam Senator Liliana Segre used. Life is really short. So if there is someone losing 30 minutes of his time insulting me, so I feel just sad for him, she declared in an interview. So that means that we have a strong work to do. We must convince that we must be really engaged in to change, firstly, the cultural perception, then the education, and then to have clear legal definition of what is negationism, which is different from any kind of hate speech crime, in my view, and not only from a legal point of view, but also from a personal point of view. And then have concrete measure to stop any kind of actions against which negates what happened. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Antonetta. Thank you very much. And now let me do my part of this symposium. So let me start with our organization, the ICDD. I believe that educational part is education is a kind of political political issue. What I mean that the education involves ideas, involves philosophy, involves politics. And the Holocaust education is a very important tool, I believe, to teach people about human rights and about one of the most terrible events when human rights were really broken, breached. And I don't want to talk with this cliche, you know, one of the most educated nations in Europe in the middle of the 20th century, but it applies, I believe. And for me, the Holocaust education, one of the tools of prevention, okay? Because unfortunately, still we have events like in Ethiopia now, still in some other place of the world, in the Congo, okay, which might be called atrocities or genocides. And the new generation comes to power, or at least to arms. The recent conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia, which cost 6,000 lives, was a part of the old animosity between Armenians and Azeris, connected also to some extent to the genocide of Armenians in Turkey 100 years ago. Okay, and there was a massacre of Armenians, for example, in Baku in 1903, and so on and so forth. So the Holocaust, in one of the most documented, huge examples of organized genocide, highly organized. So it should be explained to the generation, to the young generation, and the older people as well. The problem is, in my view, that now we have people, students, young people who were born in the 21st century. For them, this is the event of the 20th century, last century. For many of us, it is not. Okay, like I don't know. For Americans, the Civil War still it was the 19th century. Okay, like last century means a lot. How to bring this to them? How to make them related to this event? It's a very big problem. And I will give you one example. At ICDD, I'm in charge of the former Soviet Union and the so-called Eastern Bloc. Recently, I talked to a young woman. She's originally from Kyrgyzstan, and she lived in Russia. Now she's in the United States for some time, whatever. Her Russian is perfect. And when I asked her, does she know the word genocide? She didn't know. She didn't know. She studied, and actually she studied law. Okay, I believe back in Russia or Kyrgyzstan. For me, I was amazed and stunned because 11 years ago, less than 11 years ago, in her native country, in Kyrgyzstan, there was a small genocide when Kyrgyz people massacred Uzbeks. She knew about that. Okay, hundreds of people, maybe thousands of people were killed, including children. No clue what it is about. Okay, when I talked to another woman, also from Russia, a little bit older, 30s, and she said, "No, why should be interested? She should be interested in genocide or the Holocaust. It is not related to her." Okay, this is a very big problem. People don't feel related. Here in the United States, we have a country, it's a great country, which participated in the Second World War, but still students have no idea about the Second World War. I mean, some idea, not a real idea. Okay, we work at this at the New Jersey Commission on Holocaust Education. I have two colleagues from there here. I'm very happy that you're here. Thank you. Okay, and at the commission we talk about the Holocaust education for children in New Jersey. We talk about a new curriculum to tell about Second World War, but still one of the major focuses is how to relate to the new generation, how to relate these events, how to make them feeling. Why it's very important? Because I believe if one person feels a pain of another person, even another group, even not related group, far away, this person would consider these feelings to a problem in another place of the world, okay, to take care of that, not to just skip a news that in Ethiopia, hundreds of Tigray people were killed, shot on spot, and so on. So what's new? Nothing new. So just finishing up, I believe that, I mean, I absolutely agree with Steve that Ian Frank's diary, which is on one hand is very important, it's not related. No. Education should not be fun. It should be hard labor, which should be interesting. This is another point. It should be really interesting. We have to make it interesting, and we have to make it connected to our life through the past. Okay, this is my point, and this is political, because again, new generation, they go to universities, they step into real life, they become politicians, they become officers of the army, they become technologically savvy experts, so on and so forth. They make the society, the world society, the global community. So, and this is why I believe it's a part of our work at the ICDD. And it's a lot of things should be done, and we are doing this. And we'll continue our discussion in the future. I believe it's very important with experts in the field from the United States and from the world, from other countries of the world. And we are doing some programs with other countries in this direction. And probably that's it. Just I wanted to share my feelings and my opinion, my kind of thoughts about that. So thank you very much. Now it's time for discussions or questions or comments. Yes, so Antoinette, sorry, one more point. It's very important. Sorry. Uh, Under the angle of the Jewish people, yes, and anti-Semitism is, like everyone is saying, is growing, and the perceptions, the same trend is in the United States, like in Europe, in general in the world. And unfortunately for the Jewish people, this is a part of their history. But on the other hand, Jews are afraid of the new Holocaust because it's already in the past, in the recent past. We still have Holocaust survivors, bear witnesses of that. So it's a very important point too. So we have a global community and we have a Jewish community, and Jews feel to be victims or and maybe future victims of this trend. So it's a very important component as well. Okay. Otherwise, now please, the floor is yours. Any questions, comments? Everyone is welcome. Yeah, yes, Eric.
Hi, everybody, and thank you for this nice conference. So I would like to add something after the Stephen speech. I think we have a problem with the young generation, and the question that we have to ask all the time is how to teach young generation about the Shoah. And the second question that we have to think with professors, with many people, perhaps with people who lived in the Shoah, to explain to the young people, because they didn't understand what was so specific in the Shoah. What is the difference between the Shoah and other genocides that we can see over the world now? But we have to think about that. That was my little contribution.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Eric. So, Antoinette, you want to say something?
Yes, just add something about just subscribe Eric's position about the need to underline the difference. But it is always related also not only to education. I think they are the perception and the education, because you can train, educate, but as you already said, Igor, if you don't feel what happened, you will not you, but I imagine young people nowadays around the world or studying in the history books, they can learn a notion, it happened so many years ago, but they don't feel what happened. So we must insist about education and perception of what it was, about what it was. I don't know if I have been clear. So it's
Yeah.
both.
Yeah, I guess we may be coming from two different places. In America, there is never a lack of how people feel. They feel about everything. They empathize about everything, but they don't know anything. I mean, one really has to be very tough on
Yes,
this,
the contrary, exactly.
you know? And it's up to us, I think, to just, if I can quote Marx, raise the material level of culture. That's the task. And, you know, it occurs to me, for example, one way to do this, I mean, I don't know how many of you have seen Claude Lanzmann's Show Up, all of it. Have all of you seen it, all of it? Be honest.
No, only
Yeah,
no.
it was unbearable. Yeah, all it did was talk. But in the academic community, of course, it is the be all and end all. Personally, when I taught my Nazi classes on Nazism, what I showed was two different things. And you can think about how they fit together. One was Alain René's Night and Fog, which runs 45 minutes. It was the first thing done basically about Auschwitz. And then that's for the feeling, right? But they also explain a great deal. He's a great director, forgotten director, who also did Hiroshima Mon Amour. And the second thing I show right afterwards is called the Wannsee Conference. The Wannsee Conference, of course, was where the Wannsee was the town, and the Dasha where the final solution was formulated. And it was run by Reinhard Heydrich, who was the only Aryan amongst the Nazi elite. He was a great favorite of Himmler's. And as it happens, the notes of that meeting were lost and then discovered later, 30 years later, and an enterprising director made a movie out of it in German. There's also a translation in English, an English version with Kenneth Branagh. But the early version has a better sense of these guys. And basically, you see them sitting around the Nazi elite, and they're just talking about numbers. This is just another technical problem. And so on the one hand, there is the emotion that Antonietta wanted. And on the other hand, you see this completely dull discussion, dull but shocking discussion of how the Nazis perceived the Jewish problem, or what they saw as the Jewish problem. All of these things can be done, is what I'm suggesting to you. The concerns, for example, that Antonietta raised and that Igor raised, these can all be met, but we have to approach this in a new way with some new imagination, because the other stuff just isn't working. And I'm sure that's true in France too. Yeah, and certainly in England, it's even worse than in the United States. So anyway, that's just my thoughts.
Marvin? Marvin?
I would like to say a few things. I'm on a commission where I want to find this interesting. I've worked with Yad Vashem, and it's very interesting. I met with the top people there. Israel did a analysis of Israeli students, and they provided a test for them, and they found out after the test that in Israel, that young Israelis had no idea about the Holocaust. They couldn't tell you anything. You're saying to yourself, how could this be possible in a country that is Jewish, that wouldn't know, that it's people, and it came out of the Holocaust that they don't know. So they realized that when you bombard people with Holocaust stories showing Yad Vashem and people burning and people being shot and all this stuff, the impact on the student doesn't work. So they restructured their process and realized that they had to show the human emotion that happened during that time, and that they had to take, like, for instance, the story of a child. So now the student could relate to it, see what kind of decisions like that person had to make throughout their life during the Holocaust, and children can relate to that. The problem is we were bombarding them with what the Nazis have created as the historical information. And that's the problem. We need to refocus how we're teaching our students. And we're not doing a great job at it. When we tell, like Maud tells her story, that has an impact because they can relate to her. They can see that she was a child. These are the kind of things that children think about, and they can see, I never thought about that. What I have to make a decision between that person and that person. How it is that I don't get food, or I don't know where my mother is, or I have to leave my parents. All these kind of human things are important. And that's where the focus has to be in education. If it's going to be what the Nazis left us as a historical event, then we're never going to be successful.
Donata?
Igor, I would just to add something that you also mentioned about to educate, if rightly understood, educate the educator. Because I think that the first problem starts from the top, not on the level of young students. And just let me use a personal memory about Stephen mentioned Anna Frank book. I remember that when I was 8 years old, so many years ago, I didn't read the book. Someone did it for me. My teacher, every day, he dedicated 30 minutes during 1 year to read and explain the book to young children of 8 years old. So that's the point. So we need to insist also to educators first. And I remember that I have memories like that. I'm sure that there are a lot of educators at all level that create, and I'm referring to the European side, new approach to try to educate about what it happened and the difference, as Eric underlined, between Shoah and other crimes, international crimes. But I think that possibly we must insist first also with educator. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I believe Jonathan, maybe I'm wrong, wanted to say something. If not, Micheline, please. Unmute.
Sorry if I didn't hear the early comments, my internet was crashing. But in any event, I want to make 3 points. The first, it is clear to me at least that the Holocaust was exceptional in the sense that It was done on a very large scale. It was systematized, and it targeted a group, particularly in the Germans, in Germany, that was assimilated in the country, and that is quite exceptional in and of itself. But that also, in terms of re-educations, I mean, educations of the Holocaust, I think that we have to perhaps broaden the context. And one of the reasons it's because anti-Semitism, which is back on the rise, is associated with nationalism and populism, but also other minority have been also marginalized and excluded from the new social compact that has shrunk. And so in that sense, I think that there is a connections that can be made for generations that do not know history or do not know the Holocaust. So with respect to how the educators, and I know that some of you were suggesting that how educators should be re-educated or what should students learn about, the Holocaust seems really much a part of the past, and there is nothing, at least in the United States, history is not taught or well taught enough, and it's disappearing even from certain university, which is striking and scary in a way.
Very true.
And so I think that we have to start with sort of a more basic approach. One of the things that I found that is missing, certainly in this part of the world, is that we don't have a knowledge of what human rights mean to begin with. There's a sense of what social justice means. There's a sense of equality. Everybody has citizens' rights, some freedom of speech, but there's no sense of what it really means. And yet, the Conventions on Genocide, which was the result of the Holocaust, really was the first document of the UDHR on December 9th of 1948, prior to the UDHR, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So the most quintessential and important document of human rights is not known, just as the rest of the text that was inaugurated a day later. And so I really think that we have to reclaim, generally speaking, human rights educations in which genocide, Holocaust will have an important part, and in order to reconnect to other form of problem. Now, we have challenges because there are competitive narratives. And one of the competitive narratives, particularly with the Israeli case, as we know, is Nakba. And people might like it or not like it, say, oh, it's nothing to do with the Holocaust. And some will say, well, you're not paying attention to the plight of others. But it is a competitive narrative. And this is one of the challenges, among other challenges, that needs to be taken into account as we're refocusing our attentions about the way it has to be reintegrated in the education system. So this is for my short comment.
If I can, Igor, just 2 points, because I think Micheline is very much on target. I think there's one simple way to do this. I mean, we think that on the one hand that this, the experience in the Holocaust has this completely human dimension. Well, maybe it does, but in a certain way that's not concrete. I mean, it's very hard to bring that down to the Congo. It can be done, but it'll take some doing. But a simpler way is something we haven't talked about at all, which is the new view of the Holocaust that was put forward. It's a very radical view by Timothy Snyder. And he's a brilliant historian. And he talks about the bloodlands. And basically his point is that twofold, that the Holocaust has to be expanded beyond the concentration camps, because more people were killed outside the concentration camps, including Jews, than in the camps, weirdly enough. And this would bring in the former Soviet Union right away, because it's that area between Germany and the former Soviet Union and Eastern Europe that serves as the basis for the bloodlands. Second thing is an interesting phenomenon, which I just throw up to you. When Eric and I were in Russia with Igor, I became fairly good friends with the director of the Munich Institute for Contemporary History. We talked a while, and Matthias sent me as a present. Now, I should say, he left it with friends of mine in Germany for me to pick up, a present, which was a new critical edition of Mein Kampf, of Hitler's biography. Now, when the Germans do a critical edition, this is not like just putting out, let's say, Mein Kampf is 300 pages, so it comes out 400 pages. This thing was 2 volumes, and I had to bring it back to America in 2 trips. It was like this. It must have been 3,000 pages. Now, you would think, well, big, you know, that's very nice, and so what? The thing sold 40,000 copies, which is an unbelievable amount, especially in Germany. That would be a few 100,000 copies in the United States. Now, I'm absolutely convinced nobody, or not 5% of the people who bought that thing actually read it. And yet they keep it on their, this is what Matthias told me, they keep it on their night tables, or on their living room tables. And in a certain way, it looks good. It's a cachet to be able to say something about the Holocaust. It's a strange situation. And I think it most radically shows this flood of information that comes out on the one hand, and in a certain way, the genocide fatigue on the other, and the indifference and ignorance on the other. So I just wanted to bring that up. I mean, it is interesting that all these people bought this, and I'm probably minimizing the amount of pages this thing is. It weighed 30 pounds, the 2 volumes together. So there you have it. You know. Anyway, I thought it was an interesting point. But the key thing that where Micheline is completely right is we have to approach this with more imagination and with a different focus. Yeah, and I hope we'll be able to begin to do that.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Any other comments, questions? No. Okay, so
Igor,
yes.
just one thing, if I may. Sorry, sorry to abuse of the right to have the floor. So just simply be agree with Micheline about to do reference to international human rights, in particular international human rights law. And to me, education is also must also include, but that's my point from a legal point of view, starting from limits to freedom, legal limits to freedom, freedoms and freedom of speech, according to international human rights law, is not absolute. And in my view, too much freedom is exactly the contrary of freedom. I know that it's a very big issue for people coming from United States, but to me, the fact that we can have a look to international human rights law, and I think to Human Rights Committee, it decided on many cases about anti-Semitism, in few cases, so we can get a very good example also for educational matters. So thank you.
Thank you. So any other questions, comments? No. So I would like to wrap it up with the following. I believe it was a very productive conversation. And again, this is the first one. And there are some great ideas, great criticism, and also what I heard, hope. Okay, that's not everything is lost yet. Okay, so we'll have 2 more symposia, and I believe that that we have to analyze this and come up with some kind of practical matters, okay, and ideas for the United States, for Europe and for other parts of the world, because again, it's international and which is very important. And like Steve said, hopefully at a ICDD, we will be able to come up with some kind of, again, practical ideas, okay? And through our contacts to try to bring new views and new points of the Holocaust education. And again, under the angle of, as I already said, human rights, like Michelin said, it's very important, and legal issues, legal problems, like Antonietta pointed out several times today. And it should be combination. And it's very important for the young generation because they live, again, they live in a new world, which unfortunately the old world with many old problems. So otherwise, thank you very much. I believe we are on time finishing this. And again, thank you for participation. Thank you for listening. And it will be continued. Thank you. Bye-bye.